Hello, everyone. My name is Darren Stevens. I did my PhD a few years ago. I've done a couple of these research cafe talks. I thought I'd do another one because the angle of this one is, well, I've got a PhD, now what? And I did think that when I did mine. I kind of had an idea what I wanted to do. And what we're going to talk about over the next 2 or 3 hours is my journey postdoc. And it does boil down to this: theory, what I did, the business plan, blah, blah, blah. I'm not very procedural. I'm not very good at doing the process like this. So I probably got help on that little list there. But that all falls into place when you understand what my PhD was about. So what does a PhD give you? I had an idea. I had an idea of how we think, and I wanted to work out what it is that determines how complexly we think. And my brother already had a PhD at this time, and he said, Darren, your idea is okay, but put it into the PhD journey. And by virtue of the process, you will refine your idea, you'll get some academic credibility, and it will come out the other end being a much better thing. And unfortunately, he was right. I don't tell him that bit, obviously. But the journey did for me what I couldn't do on my own. And I needed the structure and the guidance for the process. I needed to force myself to think in certain ways to allow me to do the PhD. One of the things I wanted to do was make a contribution to the field of psychology, because my theory is in psychology. I wanted it to impact what I was going to do long term, because I could see a business product coming out of it. And a very small one is that I wanted to change the world. And you can decide for yourself whether I did that or not. What I did was I created a theory called constructed development. This is what came out of my data and out of the research. And it boils down to this. Please don't read that. I will happily share the slides with you if you want them. But constructed development is the name that we give to the theory of how aware we are of our construction of self in the moment. How aware are you right now of you, of what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're thinking about it? And can you change that based on any incoming information, based on these individual, this one here, cognitive intentions, which are shortcuts in your thinking that we use out of awareness. And once they're brought to awareness, I want to get to the position where we can choose how to use them. And that's all it boils down to. We look at choice, and it looks like this kind of thing. So who here thinks that we have these kinds of little gremlins, all these kinds of personalities, whatever you want to call them, in the background? This is me. I'm a student, I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher, I'm a Call of Duty sniper. I'm a father, mustn't forget that one. I also train in a martial art. Are all of those things actual identities, or is it just a construction of my thinking in the moment? And I construct researcher, I construct father, that kind of thing. And that's what I wanted to know. Okay. But what came out of it was that we deconstruct our thinking using these 50 cognitive intentions. And on the right-hand side here, this is the thinking style, which is the combination of these individual cognitive intentions, the thinking style of what would be, in essence, a nurse. So if you consider that whatever job you do, for that role, you might have a way of thinking, perhaps your own thinking style. And you might agree that a banker is different to a nurse, which is different to an architect, which is different to a soldier. And each one of those 4 things, those 4 roles, might have an optimum thinking style. And that's what I did. I deconstructed how we think, and I created the theory of constructed development theory. Okay. It's quite useful, and it's turned out to be quite good. And the actual act of me writing all this down and putting it into a few slides, how many slides? 30 slides, but as you can see, we're on 7 already, so it's not so bad. Made me think about how I'm thinking about my own actions since I did my PhD. And that ties in with my theory. How are you thinking about your thinking from an adult perspective? So this is what I did. I knew I needed that. Once I got the theory, so what? Then what? What do I do with it? I've been banging on about it for 10 years. And the PhD was really a culmination of 10 years of me working on levels of adult development, cognitive complexity, how we think, mapping it to students, mapping it to business people. And then I got the PhD, and it all kind of reached the crescendo. And it's like, well, now what? Especially as it was, what was it, about 2020? When did COVID kick in? Because that was definitely in when I finished, and it did have an impact on what I was about to do and able to do. So the first thing I needed to do was monetize the idea. So how do I make my PhD make me money? Well, the first thing I did was a business plan. Okay. And this in the background here is something called a business canvas. You can find it on YouTube, you can find it on Google, that kind of thing. Okay. COVID, start of 2020. Thank you, Tom. Tilda, I will share my slides with you. Thank you very much. I will. So how do you go about monetizing it if it's just an idea, if it's just a PhD theory? Well, that's why you need these things. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not very good at procedural thinking. I'm not very good at planning this stuff here. I needed someone to help me. But my excellent idea was it's a theory of thinking. So my business strategy was apply it to everything. It doesn't matter. Whatever comes at me, apply my theory to it. And I've pretty much stuck with that, by the way. So what I did was I started to create some websites. So this is my personal website, darrenstevens.co.uk, that kind of thing. So I've got my personal website out the way. I'd already written this website before I'd got my doctorate and put that on there because I was very keen to get my doctor title. I've got a business website. Now, it's a great website. However, it's too academic. There's too much information on it. There's too much text on it. I really need to strip it down. But it's all part and parcel of growing beyond my theory, beyond the research. There's a lot. You can see that there's a, these are the coaching 2.0, the developmental leadership, the awareness quotient. These are all things that emerged from my theory. But transferring it from a theory and a thesis, which was about this thick, into a website and a business, really hard work. And this is another idea that emerged from it, but we'll come on to this at the end. It's about levels of development for people who call themselves, for example, coaches, mentors, that kind of thing. And we'll talk about that at the end. So what did I do in order to facilitate these ideas? Well, the first thing I did was I was going to use a rude word there. I won't use it. I pretty much attended, gave a talk at every single conference I could find. Anything that appeared, whether it was agile, requisite agility, NLP, I didn't care. I did every conference I could just to get my theory out there, my ideas out there. Does that make sense? How does my theory map to small businesses, to agile, to where it says Dr. Darren Stevens there, that's a brand new thing called potentialization. And they want to use my framework to do some profiling. Absolutely brilliant. It hasn't happened yet, but it's working, So I just tried to get out there as much as possible. I did conferences in India, America, all online, obviously. So I never actually left my summer house, which is where my office is. So I did all those conferences and I gave all those talks. And I was lucky enough that being online, they could all be recorded. So what did I do then? I created a YouTube channel and I put all of my talks, as many talks as I could, up on YouTube so that you can go there and watch them. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see that not many people have actually watched all my videos. 17 here, 104 there, that kind of thing. A couple of hundred on another one. But it's all about getting the theory out to everybody else, making people aware of it. So the other thing I felt I needed to do to move my PhD research out of the realm of academia into the land of the real world was blast a load of LinkedIn articles, that kind of thing. And I like to disrupt people, and I like to disrupt how we think. So I did talks about personality isn't real, and I aimed it at the occupational psychologists. I did a talk about my framework, intention, awareness, choice, response. and I aimed it using hashtags and whatnot at all the psychologists that are out there. And I did talks about emotional intelligence isn't real. Well, that's going to get a few people annoyed, and it did the trick. You know, a lot of people started to read it, and a lot of people started to ask about my theory, which was what really I was looking for. I was looking for people who wanted to say, Darren, can you tell us a bit more about your theory? So what I did then was I got LinkedIn working, and I started arguing with random people on the internet. And people were coming across me and coming across my content and being talked about by other people and actually asking, Darren, please, can I join your network? I've heard about you from somewhere else. Well, that was the whole point of the conferences. And the conferences were starting to work. Things like this, though, where you apply Gödel's taxonomy and blah, blah, blah. I don't understand some of the stuff I wrote, and I don't remember it today. But in the moment when somebody asked me a question about my framework, I absolutely researched it and tried to apply it so that I could reply in the moment to what they were talking about, what they were asking, because it generates that kind of interest and intrigue. And then once you've got people talking about you, to you, wanting to join you, you kind of move on to people arguing with other random strangers, but using your theory as the supporting evidence for their arguments. And I thought that was great. Obviously I did, and I don't mean that in an egotistical way. I just thought, fantastic. Someone's using my framework to create an argument. Notice how it's also about emotional intelligence, because they ask the question, which is better from a leadership perspective, emotional intelligence or intellectual intelligence? And the guy there, Sean, says neither, dynamic intelligence, which is what I created coming out of my framework. And he says, look, identified by Stevens. Yay, that was brilliant. So once you've got them talking about you, to you, and using your framework, what I then wanted to do was I wanted to get people using my framework in their own businesses. And this guy, I've got 5 people in Australia who want to use my framework and create a completely new idea. Thank you, Jody. Completely new idea about how we coach people, how we develop human beings, how we influence CEOs and thinking. And he's using my framework to do his workshops right now. I stole this off him this morning, by the way. I had a conversation with him this morning, and I took this morning. And he's using my framework to do his workshops. Now, obviously, with that comes the essences of licensing and intellectual property and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not very clever with at the moment. I've got to figure it all out. But for me, they're using my framework. And right now, that makes me happy. I know that's the point, though, isn't it? If we go back to the very beginning, how do I monetize it? Well, that is one of the ways of monetizing it, but I've got to get the lawyers involved and all that stuff, and that's not very appealing. I will eventually, I'm sure. And once they're all talking about you, you then get them to join your cult. I mean group. So on LinkedIn, I have a bunch of people who've gone through my awareness quotient training, my coaching 2.0 workshops, and my other stuff like that. And I've created a group called Constructed Development Theorists, where we look at the my theory and look at it from all different ideas and different ways. And they're all members. Now, I don't know where it says members there, but 50 members. There you go. You see up the top there. So that means around the world, there are 50 people using my framework, my awareness quotient, my tools in their businesses, because they only get to join this group if they've done my workshops. But then again, when you look at it from a perspective of apply it to everything, well, what does libertarian free will mean? What is a realist? Well, a realist is somebody who is procedural and preactive and global, and we can map their thinking structure. So I applied my framework to all of there's 4 there, but I've got loads of them, philosophical positions, that kind of thing. I've even tried my best to give it a perspective from a therapy opinion. I don't know if you guys know this, but when you go to hospitals like St Andrews in Northampton, it's a specific mental health hospital, and they do these things called grand rounds. And people can come in and give talks. And I gave a talk on my theory. And I thought to myself, if anybody's going to kick my butt, it's going to be a room full of clinical psychologists and forensic psychologists and that kind of thing. However, they didn't. They actually really liked it. And they could see the way that how we construct our thinking is useful from a therapy perspective if you apply it in the kind of CBT way, cognitive behavioral therapy way. So I didn't get my butt kicked, which I was really happy about. But what eventually came out of it all is the idea that we need to have some form of, from a coaching perspective, and Coventry University has a coaching department, but we don't have any guidelines on how to develop coaches. And is a coach capable of coaching you or me? How do we know? So I created the Stage Coach Institute. Why? Because it's about stages, it's about coaching, and it's a governing body. And from this, we can work on things like the awareness quotient workshop and accreditation, and other things that I offer, like I'm making this up, guys. This will happen, but right now it's in the embryonic stages, and 3 Leaders program is a real program that's already been translated into German, and Spanish, but definitely German. Portuguese, sorry, not Spanish, Portuguese. So I've sold it to other people, that kind of thing. Coaching the same principles. And then why does a coaching approach fail? Well, you've got these ideas about generation 1, 2, 3 from a coaching perspective. So what I've done is I've said, I'm going to start looking at coaching from a completely different starting point. I don't care what your problem is. The problem isn't your problem. The problem is how you think about your problem. Brackets, Captain Jack Sparrow. Okay, and this is where Coaching 2.0 came from. But this is also where the idea for an institute came from, because if we're starting coaching and development at a completely different starting point, we need a completely different way of measuring it and controlling it. We don't need the existing institutes, academies, federations that are already out there. And I've got guys in Australia who are stumping up some money to help me to develop the Stage Coach Institute. And then what you do is you go through various levels of accreditation. MCO just means more complex other. It's a better way of saying coach, in my humble opinion. And we look at how complexly you think. 6, 7, 8, 9, that kind of thing. It's all about vertical development. And then, so what else did I do since leaving? I've started to write these books. I've got this one, the middle one, Thinking Deliberately, is almost done. And the reason it's called Thinking Deliberately is because we don't. We think we do, but we don't. And I have data on PhD students, because even PhD students don't always think deliberately. And then I've called this one, this is the idea behind my new coaching framework. I've called it the Way of the Intercepting Mind. Why? Because I stole it from Bruce Lee. He did the Way of the Intercepting Fist, and I've been studying martial arts for 30 years, and I thought it was a really good way of doing it. And then finally, the things that really, really make me smile, these are the things that actually don't make any money. So when I talk about monetizing my framework and my theory and my research, these are the things that make me smile. I've got 2 people using my framework to do their master's degree. I've got one guy in Holland using my theory and framework to do his PhD. And I've got potentially 2 more candidates doing their PhD. And part of their PhDs will be using my awareness quotient scale and measure. And I hope they come off. And that'll be fantastic. There is absolutely no money in that, but that's the bit that makes me smile. And I'm involved in a bunch of research projects as well, profiling 500 coaches at the International Coaching Federation. That's going to be a really interesting study. And you can also see all my research papers. I've got 2 out. I haven't got any published, just like Bina said. I haven't got any out, but they're all being looked at right now. And as soon as they're done, I think I'll be on my way from an academic perspective, because I'm not silly in the sense that where I am right now is in Coventry University in London, because I'm also lecturing. While I'm getting all this off the ground, I'm also lecturing down here to keep my wife happy. I mean, to get some money in, you know what I mean, right? So I've been working as an associate lecturer. It keeps me involved in academia. And I do hope that I can do my stuff and academia at the same time, because that's what I'm working on right now. And that's pretty much it. I rushed through that, so I do apologize if it went too quickly. Or if there's about 20 minutes, that's not too bad. Does anybody have any thoughts, any questions? So Jodie's talking about constructivist theory. Yes, absolutely. Grounded theory is difficult, related to inclusivity for disabled students going forward in UK higher education, and don't really know what to do with it going forward. How did you know what you wanted to do? Well, thank you, Jodie. I've been working with adult development, how we think, for 10 years. However, it's not easy to get into a bank and charge them £2,000 a day if you haven't got a doctorate. And does that make sense? My wife works for, well, she doesn't anymore, but she did work for a bank for 20 years. And she said that she probably couldn't introduce me to the bank until I'd got my doctorate. And I just assume it's because she hates me. But in reality, it's because of the credibility factor. The doctorate really forced my thinking. As Jodie's going to find out, it forces your thinking to come up with a system and a process that works, so that instead of mumbling on like I sometimes do, you actually know exactly what you're talking about, and you can hit the right note with the right people at the right level of the organization. That's why I did my doctorate. So I kind of had that idea to begin with, Jodie.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Darren, what did you do before your doctorate? And what led you to do doctorate in the area where you did it?
Before the doctorate, I did a lot of things. I actually still own an IT company, that kind of thing. But I had a coffee shop. I ruined it. I lost about £80,000. It's true. My wife still mentions it. And I then got into adult development. In about 2012, I then started to look at levels of adult development. Robert Keegan, another guy called Otto Lasky. And I thought it started to answer all the questions I've been asking. What does it mean to be clever, to be smart, to be intelligent? All those ridiculous words that actually don't mean a lot. What I wanted to know was, what's the difference between my thinking and someone else's thinking? And it actually boils down to levels of complex thinking. And it started to answer those questions for me. So I was doing a profile system called the Identity Compass. And I got a job at Coventry University, London, profiling. I created in Coventry, London, I created something called the High Flyers program, where we take 12 MBA students, we profile them, and we change how they think and make them grow a little bit in their thinking. And I noticed that the way the students thought could be mapped out using the cognitive intentions that were in the profile. So in order to prove that, I had to do the PhD. I had to put it down in a formal way and say, this is my hypothesis. I think that students and people have these different levels of thinking. And I think that level 3, from a Keegan perspective, can be mapped to external partner, all these things, right? Whereas level 4 can be mapped to different cognitive intentions. And that's what I did. I also did a load of NLP training when I was younger, that kind of thing back in the early noughties. But in reality, the PhD supersedes all of that. And it just so happens, I had 8,300 profiles. So I had quite a lot of data, quite a lot. And so I spent nearly 4 years doing that in my late 40s. But it took up all my time. But that was the kind of thing that I wanted to know. Does it apply to everyone? Can we really look at how we think?
Thank you so much. I asked because your work is very practical.
Thank you.
Very, very practical and very insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Darren. And yeah, just to mention, you do have the record for the most presentations at a research cafe now, with 3. There's a few people tied on 2, but you've pulled ahead now. So it's always really fascinating to hear your research.
It's all progress. We're now moving on to what do we do after the research cafes.
Yeah. Just while we're waiting on any other questions coming through the chat, I was kind of interested in the suggestion that there may be like an ideal thinking style for each kind of job role that's out there. Yeah, I was thinking, could one potential area of your business be, working with employers to help them with recruitment and stuff like that? Yeah.
There's a guy called Timo in Finland who uses my framework to do recruitment. So yes, absolutely right. What is it that makes my wife a banker? Now, my wife is risk averse and very procedural. So the question we should ask ourselves is, did she think that way before she became a banker, which propelled her to become a banker? Or did she think that way once she'd got the job and, you know, started to become a banker. And a lot of, when I ask it of the students, because I teach here and I teach undergrads and postgrads, and I ask them that question, is it your thinking that comes first or your career? And it's the thinking. How you think usually dictates what kind of career you're going to create for yourself. Does that make sense? And think about your own careers. Everybody that's done a PhD has been interested in whatever it is they've been doing. And then that propels them into, not necessarily everybody, but it propels them into the kind of career that they wanted to do. Your thinking comes first.
Yeah, just thinking about banking and thinking about the banking crisis that we had over 10 years ago now. So the people who caused that were not risk averse. They had a lot of, you know, they were willing to take lots of risks. So that's an interesting case maybe of a disconnect between what the job should, the sort of personality traits the job should have, and the wrong people maybe going into those roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm involved in a research project right now with 2 lecturers at Coventry and a PhD student at Coventry, and it's all about risk awareness, potentially some risk aversion from a banking, hedge fund, stocks and shares kind of perspective. And I'm allegedly the lead psychologist on the thing, but they're using my framework and it's fine. It's really good. But it's all mainly about behavioral economics, which is what you've just said there is about behavioral economics. And we're looking at risk from that. And we're using see on the left-hand side there, can you see the names? The one that we're looking at should be, for example, away from and towards, which is that one and that one, the red ones, right? That depending on how people score on those 2 with a couple of others, we will know how risk aware they are or how risk averse they are. And we'll know what kind of risks they're willing to take when it comes to buying stocks and shares. Like in 2008, they were just gung ho, you know? So yeah, we can actually deconstruct it. Sophie, you got your hand up.
Hi, Darren. This is really interesting. I was just wondering, I'm guessing you kind of briefly mentioned there that you're carrying out some more research with other people, but the theme of this year's Hootenanny seems to be transdisciplinarity. So I was wondering whether you had any experience of you know, this as transdisciplinary research and how you found that as someone who has done, you know, created this theory yourself, and how maybe you found, or how you might think it would be to let other people in on your project. Does that make any sense?
I'm working at the transdisciplinary. I think because I think, and this is where I probably fall down, where I think that cognitive complexity is the overarching framework for everything, because I'm biased, it's the overarching framework for everything. How you think is context dependent straight away. So the transdisciplinary thing you're talking about is, for example, does a researcher, a friend of mine finished his PhD on the emotions of crowds. And when I read his PhD, I gave him loads of ideas and he was not interested at all in my ideas. Why? Because it would have made his research way more complex than he intended it to be. Someone else, let me think about, from a behavioral economics perspective, which is a completely different, even though it sounds psychology based, it's a completely different idea. You've got different theories about what it is to look at risk from a money perspective. It's working right now from that, even though we're different, the disciplines are merging together quite nicely. The others, the people that are doing it for their masters are both police officers, and they're looking at how police think on the front line, and can they apply things like procedural justice, and what is the thinking necessary for procedural justice. So in all honesty, I mean, your question's a good one, but in all honesty, I think it transfers, my theory transfers across disciplines, because how we think is how we think, and thinking is necessary everywhere, unless you're a politician, clearly. So that kind of thing. So I think it transfers across. That's why I said at the very beginning of this, apply it to everything, because I think, in the immortal words of Baldrick, you know, I think thinking is so important.
Lovely. Yeah, I agree.
Am I making any sense, Sophie?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Jodie, did I ever get apprehensive about talking about my ideas from my PhD? And if so, how did I get over that? Jodie, do you think I suffer from worrying about talking? Absolutely not. What's interesting is to take this upper level or 3, I applied my theory to the big players in my field. So when I finished my PhD, what you could be asking, for example, is, did I send my stuff to Otto Lasky? Did I send it to Keegan, Cook-Greuter, Dave Snowden, all of these massive players in developmental psychology? The answer is yes, I did. Did I get my ass kicked? No. One of them was massively polar. Everything I said, he countered. But that's more indicative of his level of thinking than actually having a point. So I was crapping myself, I have to say, Jodie, because at any point they could have said, Darren, this is a lot of nonsense. You're talking crap. But they didn't. And one of the things that was really interesting was I was talking to Otto Lasky. Otto Lasky is about 81, 82 years of age now. And he's clearly a little stuck in his ways, but he's still a formidable intellect. And when we were talking about it, I could shortcut his processes, and he hated it. But the guy that introduced us argued my theory better than I did to Lasky. So I knew it had merit. And that gave me the confidence to talk about it in other arenas. So when I then gave a conference talk, and I get lots of questions at conference talks about, Darren, are you sure this is true? I've got 8,000 profiles that say it is. You know, I've got qualitative research that say it is. I've got 10 years experience that says it is. The experience isn't quite as useful as the research, obviously, but it works. So no, I wasn't so worried about it. When you get to the end of your PhD, I don't know how far into it you are now, but by the time you've gone, can I just say something about the imposter syndrome? If you look at levels of development, you have Keegan's stage 2, which is all very about me. Keegan's stage 3, which is socialized mind, which is about us and relationships. And then Keegan's stage 4, which is about self-authored thinking. At that point, you're starting to know your own mind. Imposter syndrome is a stage 3 problem. Once you've worked through stage 3, the emotions, the connections, and you move to stage 4, you don't get imposter syndrome anymore. I actually have a research paper on that coming out, hopefully by the end of the year. So it might sound arrogant. It's not meant to be arrogant. It's just meant to say that when you're emotionally based in your decision-making or in your construction of yourself, imposter syndrome is more possible. At the higher levels, you're saying, actually, Jodie, you've worked your absolute off to get to the end of your PhD. And knowing that you've worked really hard to get to your final result means that imposter syndrome shouldn't come anywhere near you. You know, a PhD is bloody hard work. Start there. Start from that understanding, and imposter syndrome won't come back. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Darren.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Also, I liked the self-censoring. That was quite a nice touch.
If you want to talk about it, I will happily talk to you on Teams, and we can talk about it later. That's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
And did I see in your presentation, have you got a book coming out, Darren?
I have
Yeah.
Thinking Deliberately, and I've literally called it Thinking Deliberately because we don't think deliberately. We think we do, and even I think, you know, it's my theory, and my scale goes from AQ5 up to AQ10, but I only go to about 8, myself, 8.3, 8.4. I'm not a 9 or anything like that. So I know that even I don't think deliberately, and it's my theory. It just means, you know, I thought of it. Doesn't mean I'm any good at it. But so yes, I think that's going to, it takes apart things like, there's been quite a few books out recently. Surrounded by Idiots is the one that comes to mind, and it's just awful, yet people have bought it in their droves, and it's pop psychology and it's nonsense. I
mean, I've not read it, but I know that, is it Daniel Kahneman has a book? Is that called, is your book in the same sort of field as that? Yeah. Yeah, Kahneman is Thinking Fast and Slow with System 1, System 2 thinking, and that's when you know you're an academic. You can reel off the nonsense in your field. But yes, and also please understand as well that things like emotional quotient or EQ and EI, I don't give them any credibility. EQ was created by a journalist, not a psychologist, and it's not necessarily true at all.
things like this that people take for granted. How do you know that you do, for example, you're an introvert or an extrovert? And what does ego mean? Once you realize that actually your personality is a choice, Jody, how you construct you is a choice. That means you are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Once you understand that, ego, personality, trait theory, they all disappear. Thank you, Mohammed. Mira, I don't know. I'm not very good at dancing. I don't know, but that would be a more that would be a somatic intelligence experience, wouldn't it? Somatic. It could be interesting to look at it. How are we for time, Tom? Have we got to finish?
Yeah, I mean, we can. It was scheduled till 2:30, so if there are more questions and people want to keep the discussion going, we can keep going for 10 more minutes. But you know, we'll see. Another question from Jody. Yeah, how did you get your book deal?
Don't apologize for the questions. I sent them. Basically, I asked them, "Would you publish my book?" They sent me a template, and I filled the template in. They then send that. It's quite long. They then send it off to 3 reviewers, and then come back and say yes or no. And in my case, they said yes. However, you've got to get published first.
So, peer-reviewed journal articles and things like that, yeah.
So I'm waiting for my first article is out there. My second article is ready to go. Once that first one's done, then constructive development theory is peer-reviewed and out there. Yeah, and that's what I'm waiting for. And then I'll send it off. I'll send it back and say I've done it now. But yeah, you just contact them, and if they're interested, they'll let you know.
So it feels like, you know, with your PhD completed, with some peer-reviewed journal articles, with a monograph out, that's kind of like your theory accredited, or, you know, pretty much. Is that how it feels to you? You know, do you feel like you're getting
believe it or not, I'm currently, it says at the bottom there, I'm currently published in a number of other books in different countries. So it's in Spanish, German, Dutch, Finnish, Portuguese. I've got a guy, I've basically, the word I want to use is I've been a bit of a whore. I've hoarded myself out to all the top people. Why? Because it's important to make the connections. And I've got people like Michael Bachetz or Basekis on board, Michael Commons on board to say the theory works. And those guys are top academics. And if they're on my side, there's no money in it, but what there is academic kudos, and it starts to progress and roll, you know? So I just send it out to everybody, so that when the book comes out, I'll get one of them to write the foreword, that kind of thing, you know? But also I'm quite controversial, and I say things that annoy people. For example, you can't coach me. Why can't you coach me? Because you can't see my patterns. You're not high enough level to see my patterns. Well, that's the entire basis of a brand new coaching framework. And I've got people doing workshops. So just to give everybody on the call an idea, as an associate lecturer in London, I earn this much. On a Saturday morning, I can do a workshop and earn this much. So as much as I love teaching, I do love lecturing. Using my own framework and doing my own workshops, I can earn a lot more money. However, this is the whole point about building up awareness, building up the, you know, getting more people involved, doing as many conference talks as possible, that kind of thing. So
it sounds like actually COVID in a way worked quite well for you, because it brought everything online and it made things more accessible and you could do more.
I think so, yeah. I mean, the last 2 conferences I did were both in India, in my summer house. And, you know, I didn't leave my summer house. And I've got another conference next month, in March. It is next month now, isn't it? So, and it's for the University of South Wales, and they've got an entire coaching organization, and they want to look at my framework and why, you know, why it's useful, blah, blah, blah. But it takes a lot of groundwork to get all that off the ground. So Jodie's question about how do you go about making your theory work, you've really got to grab everybody and tell them, because no one's going to come to you and say, oh, Darren, we've heard about you. No, you've got to go out and tell them your theory is awesome. And then back it up, obviously.
Okay, but I'll just give it a moment, see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, yeah, I'm happy to wrap up. But yeah, that was Yeah, that was a great final presentation, Darren. So thank you so much, and thank you for suggesting the theme of today's event as well, because you deserve some credit for that, because you came up with this. Yeah, it was your idea to do a recent PhD students talking about life after the doctorate. So thank you for that.
Brilliant. All right, thank you everybody. Thank you for paying attention as much as you have.
Yeah, thank you everyone. If anyone can find their hand clapping emoji and wants to give Darren a virtual round of applause, please do so. I see, there we go, lots of applause there, Darren. Thank you very much everyone. Right, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day, and please keep an eye out for the next Research Cafe being advertised, which will probably be late March as mentioned. But yeah, thank you very much everyone. Thank you.